Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Dana and Rachel. This is a podcast with book coaches, editors, and besties as we talk about books, and not just as readers, but as writers, to get inspiration, lots of laughs, and a bunch of shenanigans from time to time. This month, we have been discussing Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, and this is our editor's take episode where we kind of are trying to distill several conversations down to some big takeaways, which is not an easy thing to do. Okay, so let's just state that for the record. But before we get into that, Rachel, go ahead and let us know what's going on at A Story Cipher.
Well, actually, we're going to talk about what book we're doing next week.
Oh, yes. Come on. Y'all, Dana is lost in the sauce. It's all good.
Rachel keeps meticulous, copious notes, and this is her contribution to the podcast.
No, I feel like sometimes your notes are making me damn. Like no, yes. Oh, that's right. Okay. Well, because...
Which means that's you.
I know. See, this is why her taking the notes, because then that means I'm like, wait, my turn already? I've been trying to hurry up.
You're trying to delay because you're like, I gotta think of something. Hang on, Rachel, what's going on?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so for our next book, okay, first of all, the next book is my pick because that's why she's trying to pass the mic. I kind of think low-key when I thought I was like, oh, wow, it looks like we're kind of just doing the Black book in the Black month, which wasn't the plan, but it is. And I try my best, like when we do our selections, to sort of add diversity and things that I really enjoy or books that have done really well so that we can have an opportunity to talk about them. And so our book pick for February is Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan, which it is a really great book. I think there are a lot of things that I love about the book. There's some things that I'm like, oh, it was okay. But the overarching thing that I've really enjoyed about this book is that it has been a really great representation of an author who sort of has this, she's a hybrid. And has done really well, both indie and traditionally published. And this book, I think it won, it was New York Times bestselling. And I think it was the first time that I don't know if it was just an African-American romance had been a New York Times bestseller in a while. And there's a few key things that I think it'll do as far as diversifying our previous books. Well, we did Indigo last year, but this one is a second chance romance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we haven't had yet on the podcast.
Yes, that's what I was going to say for you. I think it's going to be very interesting. This is also a book that I feel is a great representation of African American romance, as in having in the cultural aspect. And I say that with a lot of, I don't want to say pause, but because I think there are a lot of aspects of African American culture that has been sort of integrated into general American culture. But I think it's something that you see a lot in African American romance, right? The importance of female relationships. The importance of things that just are done when it comes to Black women. And in this case, you have a couple who is divorced. Mm-hmm. And that is different. It's very, very rare that you have a divorced couple. Mm-hmm. And so it is going to be one that really will pull a lot on internal journey. It has some low emotional pull moments. And it is one that it is going to, I think you are going to either love it or you're going to be a hard pass, because I think it just has that thing of like really building a great series. It's a book one in the series.
Oh, is it like a family or is it following the same couple?
Girlfriends. So
Oh,
best
nice.
friends.
Okay.
Yeah, best friends. And so it is. It's and so and then on the flip in the final part of this, I met Kennedy Ryan at a I actually went to two events and she was at both. But the one where I was able to talk to her for a little bit was at a romance author event where she did a kind of like an interview. They did it like it was interesting. I thought it was going to be like a keynote, but it wasn't. It was like a sit down interview, and she was being interviewed, and she talked a lot about her journey with this book and some of the challenges that you have with being an African American author and writing African American romance in a mainstream sort of capacity. And to me, it gave me a whole another layer of appreciation. So I think that is also something that I'm bringing into it. But I will say this: I think it's something that is a great read, and it again, I think it's something you're either gonna love, or you're gonna be like, okay, that was good, that was all right. We did it as a book club selection,
Yeah.
and I think there were a lot of people loved looking at the setup, but I do think sometimes the cultural aspects of it is the thing where it's either you get it or you don't, and it has some things that can be triggering, but I think that is also something that you'll see, I believe, a lot of times in African American romance where the readers ask for a little bit like more depth sometimes. As far as those I don't want to give it away. We won't give it away. But I think sometimes it just black readers ask for a lot sometimes. So that's how I'm gonna say it like that. I don't have any it's like I remember like this is like a hard like a squirrel moment. I remember when I first started working with clients that were not just in African American romance. A lot of my clients when I first started were black writers because that's one of the ways that I got started. I think I told you. I used to represent writers who had books that were geared towards black writing. So either I had fiction and nonfiction. It wasn't just romance, and so I was doing things like getting them into Essence reporting bookstores, getting them on TV shows, interviews. I was doing PR work.
Yeah.
So the majority of my clients were African American clients. So when I had started diversifying my client roster, the difference in the sort of undertone of books between black romance and mainstream romance to me felt so different. I think it has been since you have dark romance, morally gray, more things that may be aligned with having trigger warnings. So, because usually that goes into a lot of like either trauma or familial relationships that bring in other dynamics. That was when it sort of was a lot more emotional weight, I guess. Yeah. And I guess that has a lot to do with just the Black American experience. So seeing that difference when my roster of clients started to diversify, that was so interesting to me. And so I think it's a norm, but it is different. It's different. But it's a great read. And I haven't read the other books in the series, but I plan to. And I did. I took this book on a vacation, or vacation-ish. And I didn't even want to read it on an electronic device. I was like, I was reading the physical book. I just didn't want to be, I was so tired. Like I didn't want to be on anything digital. And I just literally sat in the bed and read the whole time. I'm talking about cry.
Oh.
I was like, oh, like heart wrenching. Like, oh girl, I was like, oh my gosh. And it's also on the flip, one of those books for me that I did not know that that's what I was getting And I don't like when that happens, because then I want to be able to pick an emotional book when I am ready for it.
When
And I
you're
was
good and
not.
ready.
Yes. And I was already tired, and I was like, oh no, I did not realize it was so like.
Yeah, well,
So.
you see, you took it on vacation, right? So you're like, I'm gonna read. It's gonna be romance. It's gonna be fun. And then you're like, oh no,
Girl,
You're
ugly
just
cry.
like,
I'm like, I did not want to do this.
oh my goodness.
Oh my God.
Man.
So I say all this to say, great read. I think it's going to be a really great, amazing contrast, especially this read, you know, when we read these kind of reads and to see it through your eyes, like for the first time. I think it's going to be interesting. And it is a great setup to a series without being, it's not an interconnected, but it's just your female protagonists show up in the first book. And so it really does a great job of that. So it's just, it's not a hard, like an overarching plot, but that you meet them and you start like, oh, wow, like what's going on in that relationship? And so it's good. And it's also just has that family dynamic too. That's something else other than Knock 'Em Out we haven't had, because they have kids. They're co-parenting. So it really is like, it's like, so yeah.
It has that. It incorporates the messiness of the right, like the situation is sort of like,
and it gets. I listen, like I said, I think it's gonna be so interesting to see how you take the read. I think you're gonna enjoy it though. Yeah. I think you'll enjoy it. I wouldn't pick it if I didn't think it. No, I think. What I'm saying right now is it sounds real general, but I believe you know me well enough that when you read it, you're going to get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because it's a difference. It's a difference. A good difference, but it's not the same sort of difference that we had like with Indigo. That difference was on the weightiness of the subject matter.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're talking about the Underground Railroad. This is really just the difference in, I think just... all I can do is say cultural differences. And I think, again, at the end of the day, even when I say that, it is you find very common in African American romance. So, yep. So that's what we have for February. So this is
next week.
Oh, yes, that's so true. Oh my gosh.
Yes. That's exciting. We'll get excited, everyone. We've got our next book pick, Before I Let Go, Kennedy Ryan. And we'll get into the overview of that next episode.
And I would say it's a great book. Like always, you know, we aim to have books that you can be able to read if you want to do audiobook. The audiobook is a great audiobook, so it's really good. I do think that this is one of those... I find that there's been books here lately where I can enjoy the audiobook, but I love to see the words on the page. And this is one of those books where, you know, it's just something about the way that it hits. And you get very invested in what's going on. And she does the whole layers about the ex, the kids, the career, and this woman trying to sort of juggle it all. And I think that's another layer of that cultural aspect, you know, especially with nowadays people talking about soft girl life and all this stuff. It's like, baby, she doing all of the things and trying to get her footing in life after a big blow. So yeah, it's a great one. Looking forward to it.
Cool. All right. I'm excited. I'm like slightly nervous because when you make caveats like that, I always get like, I don't know what's about to happen.
But but it's always right. I'm just, I think, because I know you, and I'm saying it, and you were like, wait, what does that mean? But like, no, I just think once you read it, you're going to be like, okay, I get what you were saying. I think you will.
I think I'm going to be all right. I'm ready.
I think it will be interesting to see how you enjoy it against your normal fiction reads versus the other picks that I had. I think it'll be closer to the kind of depth you like in fiction versus some of the other romance that were more mainstream indie power hitters. You know what I mean? Because a lot of that it has depth, but it's like a popularity contest a little bit. But I think yeah, that's all I got to say.
All right.
I'm gonna put a pin in it right there.
Well, I can't wait. I can't wait to dive into our conversation. So shall we?
With the summary?
Yep, that's the one.
So with that said, because I was on the hot seat and now we're going to continue, we're going to go ahead and get into the summary before we sort of distill down what are some of our editor's takeaways. I will say this, especially this is very evident in this book club selection. Like, this is nowhere near going to cover everything that we talked about. And we are very aware that because of this book being so many layers and details and all of that, there is no way that we were going to be able to cover everything. So I think these takeaways are doing a great job of showing, like, what are those things that sort of rise to the top that will make it fairly easy for you to sort of grab a hold of something as you move forward. And I think it also can help with if you go back and read this like story again after hearing this, because I think just sometimes the information being couched in a certain way makes it so that when you go back for another read, you can see it a little bit different because you sort of have hooks to hang that information on. And so with that said, if you can give us the summary before we jump into our editor's takes.
Yes, ma'am. Vin is a Ska working on a thieving crew, just trying to survive. Just like every Ska, under the heavy hand of the Lord Ruler, God and Emperor over Luthadel. But when she gets recruited by Kelsier for a job, she discovers that her luck is way more than just luck. And Kelsier isn't just trying to rob the Lord Ruler, he's trying to kill him. This high-stakes job could change everything for Vin and Ska everywhere, if Kelsier and his crew of specialists can overcome Steel Inquisitors, noble spies, and teach Vin how to be a Mistborn, and how to wear a dress.
That dress always gets me. So with that said, Rachel, what are some of the things that you would like for us to kind of make sure we sort of grab a hold of or hang our hooks on, or when it comes to Mistborn?
Yeah, so just I'm glad that you gave the caveat before, because honestly, we had a ton of really good in-depth conversation over the last 2 episodes. So I highly recommend that you revisit those plot and character episodes, because this is like, we're pulling the kind of high-level takeaways off the top. We had a lot of really, really good conversation those previous 2 episodes. So there are kind of 3 key things that I sort of want to like pull out from our conversations. The first one is going to be about the importance and how to sort of implement plot management using that core story thread. And that's going to be thing number 1 that I really want to talk about. Thing number 2, which is directly related to plot management, is creating the first book of a trilogy such that it is a standalone. And the core story thread and understanding that core plot is how you do that, so that your first book of your trilogy or series clearly wraps up and we have satisfied the questions that we raised and sort of fulfilled our promises, while still opening us up for the next book or books. And then finally, one of the things that I think really came out of the characters' conversation that I just thought was so helpful is just talking about taking advantage of every opportunity with the cast that you have. So you have a certain cast, because your plot is like, oh, this character is going to show up and I'm going to need this character. And, you kind of collect all these characters, but then maximizing the effect of the characters that you have. So it's like, okay, these characters are already on the page and they're here for whatever plot reasons or character, because you came up with this character. And then asking more questions about them, right? And inviting those characters to participate in the themes and the overarching exploration of the story, so that they become so much more than just like, this is a best friend, this is this, right? And they become multi-dimensional layered characters. And I just think that that's a really, as we were talking in the previous episode, that was such a like moment of insight of like, oh, there's a real opportunity here and make sure you're taking advantage of it. So I kind of want to pull that back out to the surface. What about you?
We're like neck and neck on that. Like those are the same things that I had. I wouldn't have said it exactly that way, but that's why we're different. I think the last thing that I would probably tack on to that is probably more of a summation of just realizing that this is a very complex plot, and it's a complex story, but everything is done in layers. And we talked about, you said last time, in our last conversation, talking about multiple passes of writing. And I think the same thing can be held true when it comes to working on a story like this, of that there are so many layers. And if you really allow yourself to just isolate for a second and just sort of digest and just go across. I mean, I was telling Rachel, like, I have notes everywhere, even though I write up the notes, but just kind of stopping and is like, okay, Vin is, she's ska, she's a woman, she's a crew member, right? But at the end of the day, this really is all about what is her journey on and having full agency and being fully who she is. And, she's Mistborn, she's all, and each one of those sort of identities, especially those that tie on to that core plot and to the ultimate journey that's the overarching plot, can really inform what needs to be done and the questions that you need to answer, what opportunities that you have to connect into the other elements of the story, just by just allowing yourself to look at it in layers. Because I mean, this would be a really great thing to say, man, I wrote something that I felt like did even half as much as this does.
Yeah.
But I think, but before we dive in, I don't always think that is the ultimate goal, like, because the way you see story is different, and you allow yourself to be inspired by having characters that have depth and that are more than just like a scared kid trying to survive, right? There's so much more to her, and that's what allows you to sort of have the reach that you want as an audience, because so many people can relate to Ben, not because they're a ska, but because they're an underdog, or maybe it's because, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many ways. And I think that is what can give a book legs more than anything else. And so allowing yourself just a moment to do that. So I guess I can do that back as a full circle. That will be the only other thing, just looking at it in layers, and then going back to the other conversations, because I think we don't have to rehash it, but they're so important when we talked about the rules and talk about the romance subplot, and talk about the wounds and things like that, how they sort of are incorporated here. And so, yeah. So with that said, let's go ahead and just take it to the top of what you wanted to talk about, which is the plot management and understanding that core plot, and being kind of making sure that you have that locked in.
Yeah, so one of the most, and I do this with all of my clients and all of my students. Like, this is a sort of tool that we use all the time, but especially, and so really every story you want this. So whether you're writing an epic fantasy, whether you're writing a romance, right, whether your story is super straightforward or crazy complex, you still want to have a foundational plot, some kind of core story thread where the audience knows what it is that you are going to attempt to give to them, right? Where it's like they understand what this journey is, even with all the surprises and all the good stuff that you kind of have planned for them, right? So this is how you keep, but especially with a story like this that's very complex, that has lots of different layers and threads and all this good stuff going on, this is how you really anchor your story and your secondary plots. And it's this core story thread that forms the through line of your story, right? So to sort of formulate this, your inciting incident is going to raise a story question that is going to get answered at the climax. So we talked about this in plot. The inciting incident is that Vin gets recruited by Kelsier for a job to overthrow the Lord Ruler. It raises the question, will they succeed? And then in the final showdown at the end of the book, the climax answers that question. So by the end of the climax, we know whether or not we have an answer to that story question. They either did or they didn't succeed. And then all of the other plots wrap around this, right? So the romantic subplot complicates the question, not the question, but it complicates their efforts to overthrow the Lord Ruler. It's an unexpected thing that happens. Vin starts to fall in love with a noble, and that complicates their endeavors to overthrow the Lord Ruler. Vin's training, she's kind of having to learn on the job, and also, the success of the mission somewhat hangs on her also being able to fully pull her weight as a Mistborn. And so all of the other plots are really influencing and influenced by this core. You can kind of see this core story thread, and all the other plots are anchored to it. And so that in every scene, we see that we are getting closer to answering that question, will they succeed or won't they succeed? And so this, because these two things are kind of directly related, this is also how you create the first book in a trilogy that can stand alone. So again, we talked about this in plot. Generally, it is best practice and most advisable to fully close the loop on the first book in your trilogy. Your audience has trusted you this far, especially if you're if you're a debut, or if you haven't built a lot of trust with an existing audience. Your audience has given you the benefit of spending all this time with you. And so not answering the question that you promised you would answer, you run the risk of antagonizing your audience. And that's why making that first book of the trilogy as strong as possible, but so that it stands alone, that is going to be one of those ways that you can ensure, or that you can help ensure that your audience is going to want to read the next book. And your core story thread is how you do that. So knowing that your inciting incident raised a story question, then your climax answers that question. You know if you've sort of closed that story loop. And so that sort of sets the basis, right? This is sort of your first act in the rest of the trilogy. And this story loop, this applies right to both your external and your internal. So that core story thread is going to resolve at the end of your story. And then the implications of that resolution are so interesting that we want to see what's going to happen in the next book and in the book after that. And the same thing will be true of the internal. You still want, because the first book of a trilogy sort of wants to be able to stand alone, that also means that your protagonist should have sort of should undergo a complete transformation. It's not the full transformation that they're going to undergo across the trilogy, of course, because that's going to escalate alongside the escalation of the second and third books in your trilogy. But we want to see that they've made a clear step forward in their internal arc. And the way we talked about it in the characters episode was, what does your protagonist need to learn, or who do they need to become by the end of the first book so that they can show up to the second book? And that's the kind of question you want to ask, so that you have both your internal and your external plot threads closing by the end of that book. And again, your core story thread is going to anchor you so that you know whether or not you've answered the question that you've raised, which is going to help you create that standalone. It's like a full summary of everything I said about this in the plot episode as quickly as possible.
Y'all, sometimes Rachel will start and be like, oh my gosh. But I totally agree. I think the biggest thing against what you're saying right now, and when you're hearing all of those words, if you're like me, where my brain just needs to sort of settle in, it's like understanding like what that story promise is and what that core conflict is. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing is not being so overwhelmed you can see this as Vin has to do this huge thing by the end of book one, or you can really say, does she feel comfortable and confident in who she is? Like, and where in the story as we've moved along, are we seeing that? Are we seeing those trial cycles? Are we seeing her wrestle with it and come out on the other side and really coming into her own? And those become those like micro moments that move us forward. Yeah. But I think a lot of times when it comes to the end of that book one, and you're saying, making sure that we sort of close that up, and we do want to do that so that we don't leave it open. But I think the biggest part of that too is so that they trust you with the next part. Like we can make it interesting, yes, because it can be like a huge explosion, but they may not want to see it through Vin's eyes. And I think that's the other part about having that sort of two-prong sort of litmus test that you want them to pass, because that the first one is like that it closes and we're still interested in Ben and we're still leaning into her journey, and we've already, which we talked about in the characters, had a glimpse of what is possible for her as a Mistborn based on the information that Kelsey shared with us, and that we've even seen through her her journey in this story. And like, do we want to continue with her? And which, you know, in this case we absolutely do. And I think that becomes a, that's why I think plotting is so helpful, because if you're like, okay, here's where I want to be at the end of book 3, here's where I want to be at the end of book 2, right, here's where I want to be at the end of book 1, so you know where those bookends are. And it will make it so much easier. Now it's not easy, but it can make it easier. But I agree. I totally agree. And then we sort of folded in the second one, which is, this is where, even though this is a trilogy, it makes it so that book 1 is standalone. You want it to be able to fully come to an end so that there is no cliffhanger regarding whatever that loop that you opened. And that question, the core question for this story, has been answered and satisfied. Now we love it when that answer only opens up another can of something. And that new can of something is what pulls us into the second story. But you want it to stand alone. And I think it makes it so that it could sometimes be a challenge, because if you did allow it to like, oh, wait, there's more sort of like an episodic sort of take on it, that you hold people over to get that conclusion. But that's where it makes sure that trust between the writer and reader very shaky, especially if they don't have a pre-existing relationship with you and your brand. Right. And so having that in them, knowing they can trust you with that, makes it much stronger. So when you talk about this, the other part of this that we talked quite a bit about in characters, which was taking advantage of your casts. And I'd love for you to sort of wrap that up, because I like you saying it that way. To me, I feel like it's an element of making sure, well, I guess it's the same thing, like making sure that you like get every element, like we talked about, that they were connected to the oppression, they were also connected to her emotional journey, and they were also connected to the external aspect with the heist, right? And so each one of those characters were layered in how he used them, which is a whole nother like showing of how this is just layers on layers on layers. But yes, talk about the maximizing of that supporting cast.
Yeah, so I think you already sort of gave the high level, right? Of like, so already, Brandon Sanderson frames this as a heist. And what does a heist mean? Well, we need a crew, right? And everybody's got a specific job. So this sort of gives you cast slots that are open, right? That's kind of like, okay, I need to fill this spot, this spot, this spot. And so then now you're like, okay, well now I have Kelsier, I've got Vin as my protagonist, and then you've got Breeze, and you've got Ham, and you've got Spook, and you've got Sazed. You've got all these different people who are serving different roles. And so instead of just stopping there, right, all of them come from a different, they all have experienced the oppression of the environment, but how they experienced it was different. And that's the reason stuff like that is so important. And I always love to highlight this kind of thing in books, is because that's what people are like. That's what real people are like, right? Even if you live in sort of closed environments, people still sort of, they'll respond to those environments differently, and they'll sort of draw different conclusions and have different, right, like the way that they even interpret the same experience, right? People will kind of have a different interpretation of what they experienced. And so when you bring that level of depth, now all of a sudden your cast is not just individual, but they are layered, right? So for example, like Dachshund came from the country, and he had a very specific experience of the oppression of the nobility. Ham has a very different, he's trying to protect a family, but the way that he does that is different, right? And he has kind of all of these connections to soldiers and these different people that honestly otherwise Kelsier maybe would not be on board with, right? So you have these different characters who bring these different, and then Sazed, right? I mean, he comes from a completely different people group, and so his experience of what the Lord Ruler has done has been wildly different, but he also kind of doesn't fit in with his group of people. He and this you learn quite a bit more about this in later books, but like, he in some ways is kind of a misfit with his own group of people because of his particular disposition and the way that he approaches something like rebellion, which is why he fits in so beautifully in the crew. And so again, what this means is you have all of these specialist spots, and even if you're not writing a heist, right, you have all these spots that is going to get populated with the cast, and taking the opportunity then to say, how do they uniquely relate to this environment? The things that I'm exploring, if I'm exploring community, if I'm exploring heartbreak, if I'm exploring, the oppression of a particular, from a god ruler or of a society or whatever, like, what are the different facets of that my different cast members can reflect? How can they have experienced this particular environment in such a way that lends them a unique experience and a unique voice to the story? And so there's such an opportunity to not just have people filling spots in your cast, but really give them their own story. And I think that Brandon Sanderson does this so wonderfully. And then you add into it your point, which I'll sort of hand over to you, is the fact that each of these people also plays a role in Vin's transformation, right? And that they become essential parts of her journey as well because of their unique experience and voice and skill set.
I think the other part about this, they're a part of her emotional journey, but it's also because she's been in the same or similar environment, and this isn't that. And part of those one-on-one moments is helping her to parse through that this isn't that, and what parts are the same and what parts are not, and her beginning to trust her own judgment in the discernment. And this is a part of her growth. I think this is also a really big part of the fact of, her age, picking her age, and picking her station in life, and her previous relationship with her parents and her sibling and things like that. Like, all of it sort of folds into it. But what I think it does is the way we see it act out on the page is through this ensemble cast. Because we get to see those individual levers, if you will, being pulled, and what her immediate inclination is. And then what is her response based on their coaching, their mentoring, their sort of interjecting what their experience is, because what they're doing is exposing her blind spots.
Yeah.
And this is what we're polishing her up to get to the end of this story. And it's being done in a way that's not a brain dump of like, well, my parents wasn't there and no one ever taught me how to do this. You know what I mean? Like, it's, we don't get that. You're getting it in the midst of, that's why I love Bree sometimes, but because he just makes it juicy, and he's just so like low key, a little bit shady, but he says something where you got to listen, and it's just a great rub. But what I will say is this, I think I could put it in a bow. It's just like, when you read stories like this, allow yourself some time to chew and digest what you just experienced. Because I think this will be so helpful with scene selection, and how do you show her growing step by step without it feeling like, well, today I learned this and today I learned that. Instead, it's very active, and it's in the moment, and it's while other things are happening, and the time is still ticking, and the crew is still trying to figure this out, and there's still aspects that we don't understand, but the time is still moving, and it just makes everything continue to move, and it makes it so that you never even consider not going back to the book.
Yeah.
right? Because we just gave this man 20 some odd hours.
Yeah, we sure did. And he earned every single
My
one of
gosh.
those daggone hours. Wait, speaking of which, just really quickly, because we're talking about the length of the audiobook, this is a quick Michael Kramer appreciation post. Okay, the narrator is so
Amazing.
Michael Kramer is an amazing narrator. He does a lot of Brandon Sanderson stuff. He and Kate Redding did the Stormlight Archives, and they did a beautiful job. But I just, specifically because you're talking about Breeze, the voice that Michael Kramer gives Breeze, my dear man, it's so good. And it's the most perfect voice for Breeze, and I love it. And Breeze will forever have that voice in my head, thanks to Michael Kramer.
Girl, every time Ben would pause, I was like, girl, I'd pause too. Because it was like, wait a minute.
Excuse me?
Did he just... She's like, did I just... But here's the thing of like, this is just one of those stories where you're doing something that is extremely challenging to have months pass in time and to not feel the lag of it, to give her time to have the training but not have enough time to be as thorough as you like you are always almost on the yin and yang of this sort of quest, and we're always seeing why we should be hopeful, but also why they're up against a formidable opponent. And all the while you have a young lady who's at the core of this, that's in it, but she's not like 100% in it. Like she's always started questioning, I don't think it's questioning her loyalty, but questioning what parts should she trust and what parts does she not trust, or trying to decipher the parts where they're revealing and the parts where they're holding back. Again, because she's viewing it through the perspective of that wound. And so with the final thing that I will say about this, I think this is not in my notes, but I think this makes for a very yummy situation to be in as a writer, where you get the absolute most as far as the opportunity to submerge your readers in your story, but you get a lot from it as well as a writer, because you get to balance these levers, you balance these moments, explore these characters, explore this world, and having 3 books to be able to fully sort of let it breathe, if you will, that it just makes for a win-win situation if you give yourself the bandwidth to do it. And so I think it's just great pick, basically.
Heck yeah.
So that's maximizing your cast, and the fact that he did it, and it's a large cast and they all served multiple purposes.
Yeah.
Right, for what they did. He just really did that well. The final thing, which I think we kind of have touched on as far as what I wanted to sort of drive home, and I think I've said it a couple of times, is just knowing that this is layers, right? It's several passes, whether you're talking about the writing process, the editing process, the process of getting to know these characters and getting to understand like what's really at stake and how to approach it in a way that is both entertaining for your reader, but that we understand the scope of the challenge that they're up against, and that we at all times really believe that they are up against something that they may not win. But we have those moments where we're like, wait a minute, this is a good crew. Then it's like, oh, right. You want that because that's what keeps us invested. And so I think when you think about this, like editor from, book coach or editor to a writer, like give yourself breathing room and extend yourself grace to be able to sort of allow yourself to go through those passes and to ask yourself those hard questions so that you can get to the end and feel really proud of what you've done in your own way. It doesn't have to be in the Brandon Sanderson way. It could be your own way, but I think you will come out a much better writer and plotter and an understander of people, even if we're doing it through characters. So, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to sort of like kind of take that opportunity to sort of like come back around to something else that we sort of had on our list of things that we sort of touched on but didn't go all the way into, which is about letting your protagonist's wounds be challenged by the plot.
Yes.
Right? Because what's so great, and so we talk about this in, pretty sure we talked about this in characters, right? Where, using your protagonist's wounds to show how they're assessing problems and like how it colors the way that they view a situation and make decisions. And that's so good because it allows us to take those micro steps forward on the arc of the internal transformation. So there are a couple of things that, like, if this is an area where you're struggling, I have like a few thoughts on like directions that, you might take this, just depending on where you are. So for example, if internal arcs are maybe like a pain point for you, right, where it's like a something that you're like, I have a protagonist who I want to go through the story, but they don't, like, I don't really know what they learn. I don't know who I want them to become. That's for those of us who don't start with characters living rent free in our heads. For all you plot people out there who are like, I've got events, and then you're sort of like, crap, I need people to actually like go in there. That's me. So the kinds of questions I would be asking are like, okay, so if you are very like plot forward and you feel like, I know what I want that external journey to be, then you might look at asking questions like, in what particular ways can this external journey challenge my protagonist internally? Like, if you already have some of those external events, you kind of start reverse engineering to like, okay, so like, what are these conflicts what could these conflicts challenge in my protagonist? Like, what is going to make what facet of my protagonist do these events challenge? Versus like, if you have a protagonist and you kind of already know maybe what you want that arc to be, then you're asking more specifically, like, how can my plot challenge my protagonist? So you're starting to curate the events, shifting them so that they're hitting right at your protagonist's pain point when you already know that pain point, right? So you're either reverse engineering a pain point, or you're saying, okay, I have the pain point. Now, how do I want to challenge that for my protagonist? What does it look like for them to kind of undergo this transformation, and what needs to happen externally to kind of push them in that direction? And then likewise, right, with your cast, the same way you were talking about, Dana, that the cast was a part of helping the protagonist to grow and challenging Vin, right? Then you're sort of like, okay, now what does my cast add into this? What can my protagonist learn from these other cast members? And you're taking and we talk about this all the time, you're taking what you do know about the story and using that to reverse engineer to answer the questions that you don't know. Mm-hmm. And this is such a great example of that, because Vin, and we talked about this before, of like, Brandon Sanderson had to audition a few different protagonists. He like wrote it a few different ways and was like, who is the best suited person for this role, before he landed on Vin, which was like, oh, this is the person who needs to go on this journey, and this is what that journey is. And that's how you have sort of the perfection of Vin, what Vin needs to learn and how she needs to grow, and the way that this story presses that thing from every direction. Got to be on a crew. This crew already has an established relationship. They have a deep bond of trust. This is, huge life or death undertaking, and then falling in love and being vulnerable with someone, right? Like, all of these things are coming together to push Vin to be the person that she can be. And it feels like, these events are uniquely curated to push her toward transformation. And that's kind of what you're looking for, is almost like that synergy between your internal and your external. And so as I was looking through our notes, that's one of the things I was thinking about, of like, oh, if you're struggling with this, these are some of the questions you can start to ask to kind of bring some of that stuff up to the surface.
Yeah, let me add a couple more to that, because I think the other part to remember is, whenever you're talking about this with when it comes to your character and their wound, a lot of times what you're going to find is that the wound is agitated because this current situation looks very similar to the one before. Mm-hmm. Right? Right. So, and she says this. She says on many occasions, and this is the norm. And so the some of the questions that I actually had on my notes was, what belief kept them alive once but hurts them now?
Yeah.
And we see this a lot with Ben. Essentially, what she was doing is a lot of using of her luck and being in situations and scenarios to stay alive, but it also put her in harm's way, right? And there's a possibility that that's happening here again, and she's always trying to figure out, like, when's the other shoe gonna drop? Okay, they trust each other, but is it real trust, or is it only trust that's temporary? So she's always sort of straddling that line. Another question you may ask is, where do they want connection but expect betrayal? Right? A lot of times the reason why she's trying to do the right things because she's seeking the connection that she misses from her brother, like that she really never had. She had a reason to her brother gave her hope because he did help, but he also taught her all these things that keeps popping up in her mind that sort of sometimes is good advice and sometimes is bad advice. And I don't think she's old enough and has enough lived experience to know what the difference is. And it's always that gauge that she's playing with. And so here, a lot of times is the fact that it's almost like a version of its own form of insanity that you hope that you do the same thing and get something different. Yeah. And that's one of those things that you're always playing with your characters. The final question that I had was, who challenges that belief without fixing it for them? And so here is the fact that she's looking for that. Even she's looking for it in Kelsier. She's looking for it in some of her crew members. But the reality is they can't fix that for her. And this is a part of where that sort of that external thing and the internal thing collide, because no one can fix that for Ben but Ben. Yeah. But you're going to keep giving them those external pokes, right? That because they have to get to the place where they realize, like, it's kind of like when we're in life, right? Everything that you need, if you really needed it, you have it. You don't think you do. You have everything that you need right now to deal with whatever it is that you're up against in this exact moment. You might not believe that, but you do. And it may not look the way that you hoped that it would look, and it may not be $1 million or whatever, but you can solve this problem. And so because if the solution was an external fix, then that means she would always need that person or that thing to fix her. Yeah. Right? This is where fiction imitates life, right? Yeah. Like the force is in you. And but asking yourself those questions can also help you to figure out, well, what are those things that you need to utilize those secondary characters, and where are they get really close to making her feel some sort of comfort or support for those internal wounds that only she can fix or come to an understanding or address, which really is on the other side of that wound, which is the lies that she's adopted as her truths. Yeah. And that's what you're always sort of playing with. And there are different levers in your story that you're sort of pulling so that you can figure out, okay, who is she really? And how is this journey going to help her to come to the reality of who she really is versus the version of herself that she had to be to stay alive.
Yeah, that's so good.
And this is such a good story. So you see this in a bunch of them, but here you see it because we have these castmates, and we see it because we have the escalation of those external stakes. And we also see it as she learns to trust herself with the elemency, if I'm saying that right, and then beginning to trust herself. Like I always say, they got to learn how to trust, like you got to learn how to trust you with you. She's got to learn how to trust herself with Ben. Yeah. And what we're doing on the page is seeing her work that out. She thinks it's an external thing, and it is partly, right? Because of who she is, and that's something she can't change. She's learning more about it. But we're watching her learn how to do that. And every book, she's going to get a little bit better with that.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes it can be really helpful to see in a context like this, because it externalizes things to such an extreme, right? Because we're in life and death stakes here. So we can literally clearly see, this is what used to keep me safe. This is what used to keep me literally alive, still breathing. Versus, right, so sometimes it can be really helpful to see it in kind of one of these extreme scenarios, because then you can look at more emotional, right? Like I'm thinking about, like, if you're a romance writer and you're taking this back to romance, and you're able to say, oh, like it gives you this very kind of nice, crisp, I say exaggerated, it's not exaggerated, but right, this very extreme version as an illustration, and then you can kind of take that back and say, oh, right, like how did my protagonist keep herself safe, and how that's beginning to sort of fail her now. And so sometimes just seeing it in a life and death stakes kind of scenario just kind of makes those edges nice and crisp, because you can see it very clearly of like, this literally keeps me safe, and this is literally how in the pursuit of overthrowing the Lord Ruler and surviving along the way and needing to be a part of the crew, how this is actively kind of working against her.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying too. It's almost like in this story, because it is so much is being packed into the story, and it's almost like, I keep saying, like almost action oriented, like they're moving, that it's helpful for you to see some of those emotional nuances with a little more clarity because of the external movement. But if you would have the same scenario in an emotional capacity, like a romance, it's just that the external circumstances would be a little bit softer, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. And so here, because they need to get the soldiers, get them trained, get them moved, get them in the cave, like it makes it so that you're seeing this and she's having to react in real time. And because of the way that Brandon Sanderson wrote this, we see how she's interacting with it in her mind and how she's sort of responding on the external. But you would see this in any story. It's just in this one, because he does a really great job of it. It is really clear. And and because it's almost as if, again, another one of those moments where the magic sort of helps, because she's trying to regulate the magic to learn this other skill, but it's also exposing those other elements of her, which are those lies that she's adopted as truth, basically because of her environment. And she's literally in the same environment, but like the other side of the coin. She's still in a crew. She's still so like fibbing to get by, right? And it's just, on one hand was for greed, and on the other hand it's for the opportunity for this group of people to have a sort of liberation, if you will.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I totally agree with that. And the last part that I would say about this, especially because of our lens in this podcast, that we're saying that we're looking at stories that do a really great job, and we're looking at how we can use this to help us become better writers. Go to your comps, right? Yeah. Once you hear what we're saying and you begin to see what we're saying, then take that that lesson and go to one of your comps that are closer to your actual genre and begin to look at how there are a lot of similarities, because then you'll be able to, like, as if we're translating a foreign language, to see it in your world. And that's when you can start seeing that a lot of these rules and principles are applicable no matter what your genre is. It's just in this one, it helps us to see it because it is so tightly done, fast paced, and it can also make it hard to see, but it does help a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that said, as we get towards the end of this, are there any other things? Okay, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot. I'm going to apologize in advance. Okay.
Oh boy. All right. I'm as ready as I'll ever be in the afternoon when I have maxed out my caffeine.
Listen, the first thing I thought is, I bet she's doing this on decaf. But I know that number one, I know that this is your jam. Like, this is like not meant to be a trick question. But I know this is your jam, and I know we cannot talk about everything, but is there any, like, one or two things as someone who knows this story really well that you maybe would even just sort of like bookmark for people to sort of look at this story for too, that we just don't have the capacity to do it with? Because I know you know this.
Yeah, okay. There's like two ones that immediately jump to mind.
See, I knew it. Come on.
I appreciate though that you warned me of like, listen, I didn't warn you before we started the recording, so I just
sorry.
So number one is looking at those key pivot moments in the story. So again, I would use the 4-act structure. So you're looking at your inciting incident, your midpoint, your all is lost, and your climax. Like pay attention to how those moments function in the story to bridge us, minus the inciting incident, to bridge us from one act to another, and how you actually witness the story escalating across 4 acts. It's the reason why I use it to teach the 4-act structure, because it's very clear. Act 1, we're kind of in this zone without feeling like, ow, I crossed the threshold, like right where it's just like it doesn't feel cheesy. It's so seamless where you're in Act 1, and then when we're in Act 2, we can feel it, and we're like, oh, okay. And then when midpoint hits and we tip over into Act 3, we're like, oh no, and we can feel what Act 3, and this is why I love to teach the 4-act structure with Mistborn, is because they give us a sense of what each act is supposed to feel like, while never, like, you know, without lagging, without sagging, but moving us consistently forward. And then when we get to Act 4, we know that we are in the famed Sanderlanche. We're like, oh yeah, it's happening. We're here. We're in it. And we can feel it, and we can feel ourselves speeding toward the end. And so paying attention to how the 4-act structure and what those individual acts feel like, and how those pivot points in the story help to tip us from one act into the next, is just like, you can learn so much from the story on that basis. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is at the scene to scene. This is for my fantasy writers, my historical fiction writers, but really, you know, because these are the ones that have the heaviest world building in terms of you have to introduce readers to a new environment. Everybody is world building. Every modern story, like, you know, contemporary anything, you're still building a world. It's just a matter of how much you're having to get the audience caught up on. And for historical fiction and fantasy, you are having to get, that's sort of the most where you're having to get your reader caught up on. Science fiction as well. But paying attention to, at the scene to scene and line by line level, how, when, and how much world building we get. Like the way that he delivers the world building through the action of the story, the times that he does explain things, and how much time does he take to explain them over and against when we are witnessing those things in action. And then the way that he paces it out, how we get information throughout the whole entire story, that is really going to help you. If you reread this book just with an eye for the world building, and you're like highlighting or annotating to kind of see like, oh, this is the information we're getting and this is how we're getting it, it would do like leaps and bounds of good for your work, if particularly if you're struggling to manage things like info dumps and your world building. So those are like two of the ones that are like that I've taught on before, and that I like will constantly point people to from this particular book. This is a good question.
See, look at there. Well, everyone, this is our final discussion of Mistborn. We did our absolute best with the 4 episodes that we had. But I would definitely say, if you have not read it after listening to these 4 episodes, what are you doing with your life? Okay. I'm
get some Brandon Sanderson and Michael Kramer in your life right now.
I'm questioning your life decisions. And definitely let us know if you have any questions. Also, any book recommendations that you would like for us to add to our future books. And we will be back next week with our overview of Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. And we're going to go right out of fantasy into romance, okay? And we will be back again next week. If you haven't done so already, visit us online at storydeepdive.com. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey, and we will talk to you all really, really soon. Take care, and as always, happy writing. Goodbye.